Yes, guys, I'm Si. Welcome to Cardiff City World, and we're back for another preview. Errol Bulut is under tremendous pressure. Can he deliver? And as usual, we've been joined by a range of characters so far already this season as we look at the games, and delighted to be joined by BBC journalist and, of course, Derby fan, Mr. Ed Dawes. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you. Are you?
I am very good, mate. Very good. Very much looking forward to having a chat, little catch up, talk about football. There's a lot of ex-Cardiff contingent in that Derby squad, mate. But I think, particularly at home, you've been under real good form.
Yeah, 8 wins in a row, actually, at home, going obviously back to last season as well. Doing really well. And, you know, it's the home form that will keep Derby in the Championship this season. There's no doubt that they're under massive pressure themselves to sustain a Championship season for more than one campaign. But when they beat Bristol City last time out so convincingly, you started to see just what some of the players were about and the way that Paul Warne wanted them to play at this level.
Yeah, what have you made of the first couple of games for Derby? Has it gone better, worse, how you expected in terms of results, and then also how has the team played?
Well, at Blackburn, they were beaten 4-2 on the opening night of the season, and really came unstuck by their defending, which was a little bit all over the place. And Blackburn had the strength and depth to bring on 3 quality strikers who all scored within the space of about 15 minutes and took the game away. But during that game, there were parts of it where Derby controlled it. You know, they had the ball, they controlled the midfield, they dictated the play. But sadly, it was the old age of, you know, you make a mistake at this level, you get punished for it. They scored 2 good goals as well. And yeah, that was a massive lesson. But, you know, since then, they beat Chesterfield in the League Cup. And then beat Middlesbrough 1-0 at home, which was a game where they were outplayed for the majority of it. Middlesbrough had a hatful of chances, and Derby capitalised on a mistake very early on and scored the goal and defended out. And it was a real signpost of the ability to defend backs to the wall, but also you've got to take your chances when you get them.
Indeed, you do. Cardiff have led, have felt a similar lesson, I think. The first couple of games, Cardiff were actually pretty good in parts against Sunderland and then against Burnley, but they conceded 7 goals in 2 games. It was almost like every time they gave the ball away or made a mistake, they just conceded. But in between those goals, they actually looked all right. But then since then, I got to be honest, it's been quite poor. The first half against Swansea was about as horrific as I've seen in a long time, and then the Middlesbrough game was like watching a bad version of the latter part of last season. It's strange because at the end of last season, Errol Bulut talked about wanting to evolve the way he was playing, getting the right players in to do that, and then in pre-season they played with a really different style of football. Not really different, same style of football, but quicker. But they're particularly in possession. The shape of the team changed quite drastically. They had sort of 5 across the front. There was sort of the 2 in midfield and the holding midfielder kind of just float in between. And it looked really good. And it looked like we were going to kind of, like I say, evolve what he had done last year, sort of stabilise the club. But unfortunately, after conceding those goals in the first couple of games, he's almost reverted back to type. And I think that's led to a bit of frustration. And unfortunately for Errol Bulut, because he hasn't got the results when he's done that, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on him. There's talk of, you know, the worst could happen for him if he doesn't get a result on the weekend. So it's certainly a game which brings pressure from a Cardiff point of view. Do you think that's something that Derby can capitalise on?
Absolutely, yeah. They'll be relishing the chance to put a team who are struggling and conceding goals at the bottom of the table to the sword. And I guess from what you've described, if he doesn't get anything and they get beaten heavily at Pride Park, it could be his last game in charge. I'm not sure whether that is something that is being mooted, but if Derby play like they did against Bristol City, which was taking the game by the scruff of the neck, dominating possession, midfield, and being clinical, Cardiff are going to have to play well. And for me to be able to say that, what are we, 4, 5 games into the season? And to be able to say that for a home game, I'm quite pleased about that, because you never know how your team's going to establish itself in that division, because they've been away for 2 seasons and the standards got higher. And obviously with the transfer window closing just before the international break, this is a new dawn, isn't it, for all the clubs? Because now they have to just sort of go with what they've got. Talk is stopping, and managers have to produce the goods. And I guess that's what you're feeling down there, and certainly what the fans up here will be feeling.
Yeah, it's a strange one for Cardiff, because going into the season, there was about as much positivity as I can remember. They'd moved quickly in the transfer market, got in some real quality players, and I think, I've been very supportive of Errol Bulut. I thought he did a great job last year, and a lot of pressure, a lot of negativity off the field, and he just stabilised us to a point where there was never talk of relegation, and I was impressed by it. And then I was looking forward to that evolution this year. And when you look at the squad, he should be doing better, but it is only, people forget, like 3-4 games into the season, there's so much more football to be played. We had a Middlesbrough fan on just before the international break, and last season they had something like 1 point after 7 games, or they hadn't won a game after 7 games, and then they ended up, I think, just missing out on the playoffs because they got it together. So I think it's not time to panic from a Cardiff point of view. But Errol Bulut does have to get his selection and his tactics right, because I even think a scrappy 1-0, but we don't play very well, might not be enough for him. For him to really push on and get the club and the fans and everyone on the same page, I think he needs a performance as well as a result, because it's been not good. And particularly because in the EFL Cup games, we played Southampton in the Premier League, and he played kids basically, but they're all kids pretty much who are knocking on the door for selection in the first team. There's a few of them, like Ruben Colwell, who everybody seems to think should be starting, but the manager, he keeps putting him on the bench, and there's a tremendous amount of frustration around that, because in the you played Premier League opposition, who, all right, wasn't the first team, but they had a lot of experienced pros, a lot of excellent footballers, and Cardiff stuck with them. It was like Cardiff came from behind 3 times, and then they scored 2 in the 91st and the 94th minute, I think. The youngsters got a bit tired and stuff like that. So I think if Errol Bulut was to name a similar 11 to what he has the last couple of games, that in itself will create frustration among the fan base. Those away fans will be loud at Pride Park. They will get behind the team. But I think it's a big, big game for Errol Bulut. And I don't say that lightly, because, I've been a big fan of his, but he's kind of dug himself a bit of a hole.
Well, his biggest problem is that he's suspended from the touchline for this game. So he's going to be sitting up top and struggling to get his messages across. So, if you're playing for your job, as it were, that's not the place you want to be.
No, indeed it's not, because they brought in Omar Reza in the summer, who's a more attacking minded assistant manager, which the idea of being a bit more aggressive and progressive in the team. So I guess we'll see. In terms of what would you expect the Derby 11 to be, sort of predicted 11 from your side?
When the first game happens after an international break, it depends who's flown from where. And you mentioned ex-Cardiff players. Nathaniel Mendez-Lang, who is Derby's captain, has come back from Guatemala after playing a couple of games in the international break. So that in itself is travelling around the world, and whether he's training or not, whether he's come back okay, we believe he has. He'll have something to prove. I wouldn't expect too many changes. Derby had a really good sort of formula in the game against Bristol City. The midfielders started to show that they had a little bit of cohesiveness. Jerry Yates played. He's been suspended for the first 3 league games of the season. So he played, and he hit the post. His movement was good. There was interaction between Caden Jackson, who arrived from Ipswich in the summer, and Mendes Lang on the right. Derby's midfield has the strength of David Ozo, who's on loan for the season from Crystal Palace, and of course Ibu Adams, who Derby worked tirelessly to get from Cardiff in the summer, who seems as though there is a nice partnership developing between those two. And then Kenzo Houdman, who's a Dutch young lad who came from AZ Alkmaar. Derby paid a bit of money for him in the summer. He's predicted to do big things. He had his best game for Derby against Bristol City, scored a really good goal, but he can shoot from long range. He can break up the play. He can move. You know, he's a decent player. He's got to get himself probably a bit stronger for the physical aspects of the Championship, because he was playing for a team that got relegated on loan last season in Holland. And you know, I'm not 1,000,000% sure on the standard of the top league in Holland, but the Championship's probably near or better than that, because that's what we say about teams, leagues in Europe. So defensively, Curtis Nelson, of course, who you know well, at centre-half with Aaron Cashin, Callum Elder, who came in from Hull last summer. He's got himself fit and has started the league games for Paul Warne. He can play as a left back or a left wing back if required. And Ryan Nyambi, who's played at right back, solid, experienced. He's looked pretty good. He came in for Kane Wilson. He used to play for Bristol City at the start of the season after Wilson got injured. But there is a good nucleus to a side there. Oh, and the goalkeeper, Jakob Vidal Zetterström, who came from Djurgården in Sweden. And Derby waited for him because they had to have some Europa qualifiers to play before they would release him. But they paid 1.4 million for him. He's 6'6". He's enormous. And they've got the makings of a good side. And it's just, you know, they're Paul Warne's players, and that's not what we've had for 2 seasons. He's had to, when he first came in, there were signings made by Liam Rosenior. The second season, he was still lumbered with players who were older, who eventually left. And these are his players. So this is where he starts to get judged. I would be surprised if there were other changes to the starting 11, although Nat Phillips came in on a season-long loan from Liverpool, who's 27 years of age. He's played for a few clubs. You know, he's got loads of experience. And the winger Marcus Harness came in from Ipswich on loan as well. He played for Portsmouth years ago. He used to play for Burton Albion as well. So he'll be looking to start games. But it's going to be interesting because Paul Warne, his ideal is a 3 at the back. So whether he's signed Nat Phillips with a sort of idea of playing that and sticking Nat Phillips in between Nelson and Cashin, not sure. But I wouldn't change a winning side.
No, that's interesting, see, because I agree with you. I tend to wouldn't break up, especially in a centre-back partnership in a winning side. However, Cardiff have done something similar. They signed Will Fish from Manchester United. They signed Jesper Darland, and then they obviously already had signed Callum Chambers earlier in the summer, and they've got Dimitri Gutas. Now, Gutas, I think, has got a year left in his contract. He's 30 years old. He's struggled a little bit at the start of this season. I think he's going to be generally the reserve choice. But I couldn't work out which 2 Errol Bulut was looking at out of the 3, because all 3 of those players will have signed for Cardiff City expecting to start. You know, Will Fish is in an important part of his career. He's 21. He's just left Manchester United for first-team football because he wants to play. Then you've got Jesper Darland, who's, you know, an international footballer, doing very well, going to want to play. Callum Chambers bought out his contract in order to come to Cardiff. He hasn't done that to sit on the bench. So I actually think Cardiff should switch to a back three and play a bit of a 3-4 sort of 2-1, but that's another thing. The manager has done that when he was in Turkey. He hasn't done it really with Cardiff. He's done it a few times in the EFL Cup and it's actually been quite successful, but he's never transferred it over to the Championship. So I don't expect him to do that when he's under this much pressure. In terms of Cardiff's team, I think he will make a couple of changes, because he said that after the last game. He said, look, it's just not good enough. We will make some changes. But I don't expect, a system change and a whole host of changes. I think Halworth stays in goal. He was a bit better against Middlesbrough, but he's not had the best start to the season. Perry Ng has also had a pretty poor start to the season, although I think he's been a bit better. The second half against Swansea, he was really good, and a bit better against Middlesbrough. Callum Chambers has been pretty good. They really benefit from his ball playing abilities as well. But I think, obviously, Jesper Darland was carrying a knock. He came off against Middlesbrough. I expect him to be fit, though, and start. Left back is where I think we will see a change. I think we'll see Joel Bagan come in at left back, the young lad who's come through the academy now, but he's 23, fairly experienced. Went on loan last year, has done well early part of the season, and then I think we'll see Callum O'Dowd move from left back to left wing. Midfield, I think he'll stick with Siopis. Alex Robertson, the young signing from the summer, will be there next to him, and I think that's a big bonus. And then I think Ruben Colwell will finally get his start over Aaron Ramsey, because Aaron Ramsey obviously played in the international break. They usually try to manage his minutes, so I would imagine he'd be on the bench. And then up front, it's a toss of a coin, I think, for Errol Bulut in terms of whether he sticks with Kanga, who hasn't scored a goal and looks unfit, or he goes to Robinson, who is fit, has looked good, scored a goal, and looks sharp. And I think, I can safely tell you that the fan base think he should be starting Callum Robinson, especially away from home, where we're probably going to look to try and keep hold of the ball and hit Derby on the break. I think having a mobile striker is important for that system and that way of playing to work. And having a striker who looks quite immobile and kind of lumbering about, and just like Kanga doesn't look fit. He looks like he's trying to play him fit, if you get what I mean. He looks like he's short of minutes. Whereas I think he'd have benefited from 20 minutes in each game to build his fitness. But also, every time he plays an hour and then comes off and doesn't score, I think it knocks his confidence. So like every game goes by, he's almost, his head's dropping, and I don't think he's showing Cardiff City fans and Championship fans exactly what he's capable of. I do have hopes for him, and I do feel for him a little bit, because I don't think he's quite up to speed. I think it's a toss of a coin over on the right wing. I think the fans would like to see Ollie Tanner in there. I hope the manager goes with Ollie Tanner, or maybe even El Ghazi. El Ghazi is severely lacking match fitness, but I would.
Is that the guy from Villa?
Yeah. And when he was in the Championship previously, he was, outstanding, so good. He
scored a goal against Derby in the playoff final for Villa in 2019. That's diving right. Header. Dreadful.
Yeah, he's a quality player, but unfortunately, he didn't play 3/4 of the season last year. Hasn't had a pre-season because he was in this legal battle with his former team, which went on for ages. So he just didn't play. So he came on against Swansea and Borough off the bench. But I think anybody expecting him to start is asking a bit much. So I think, maybe he could play an hour, but I think you're more likely to see him off the bench. I would like to see Ollie Tanner in there, to be honest, to give Cardiff a bit of pace in the wide areas. Because at least if they put Callum O'Dowd and Ollie Tanner on the wings, they'll both do a defensive job. But they've both got the legs and the quality to do something going the other way as well. So that's where I think Cardiff are. But it's interesting. who would you, if you had to single out one player from that derby sort of predicted 11, who's the danger man that Cardiff should be looking to sort of keep a tight leash on?
Who watches this? Yeah, I think. Well, I think you all know about Ibu Adams. Derby's midfield really bossed that game against Bristol City. If you think about Bristol City's midfield, has Max Bird and Jason Knight in it, both former Derby players who were sold on for decent amounts of money. Didn't have a sniff the other week. Didn't have a sniff. I think Derby's midfield, if it can be combative and creative, that's where the game will be won and lost. I think, you know, they'll want to build on that performance last time out. Jerry Yates is still getting up to match fitness. I think there were good moments from him. And Kate, I mean, everybody in the last game played really well. You know, it was all 7, 8s and 9s out of 10. So I think that there isn't one player that you have to be aware of. I think as a collective, I think it's the old adage, if you stop the midfield and look after the ball, you'll be successful and take your chances. But if you think about, as you mentioned right at the top, ex-Cardiff contingent in the Derby outfit, what is it? Nelson, Adams, Mendes-Lang.
Nat Phillips.
Nat Phillips, of course, yeah. So, you know, there are players there who will want to prove themselves. Mendes-Lang, especially with the way that it ended for him, he'll be looking to, you know, this is what you're missing, as it were. But that depends whether he plays on the right or the left. If he plays on the right, he's dynamite. If he plays on the left and Caden Jackson plays on the right, it's more of a run down the left wing and have to cut back. But I think it'll be hard. I know I'm saying this from a Derby point of view, but I think it'll be hard for Cardiff. But then you don't know which Derby are going to be turning up. If they can build on what they did 2 weeks ago, then I think they'll be okay. But Cardiff in the current slump, manager in the stands and not on pitch side, I think it's going to be a tough afternoon.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I've got to say, like you mentioned something there about not knowing which Derby's going to turn up. You just don't know which Cardiff will turn up. And if he picks the team that I think 90% of the fans and journalists regionally are like calling for, I could see Cardiff going to play fantastic football, winning the certain battles, and coming away with 3 points. If he reverts to type, I could see Derby winning 3-0 and the fans having enough, because it's kind of like that knife edge of decision making for the manager, and it's going to be interesting where and how he thinks that he can get at Derby, but also during the game, like you said, he can't get his message across. Does that mean that Cardiff will be more attacking because they'll be led by Omar Reza, who is a much more progressive and attacking coach? I don't know, but it's going to be a fascinating watch. As is tradition, mate, can you give me a prediction?
Well, on our preview programs, I'm always asked for a prediction, and I always say that Derby will win 5-0 against anyone. They haven't done it yet. But I don't know. I think it will be. I think it's very difficult to predict these kind of games just for all the reasons we've just said. But I think Derby will win. Whether it'll be comfortable, that depends on whether Cardiff can improve what they've done recently. 2-0.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I mean, Cardiff, again, going back to the team selection, depends. Like, you've got one striker who's been banging form and looked dangerous, and he's sat on the bench a lot of the time, and another striker who looks like he could play for the next 10 years and wouldn't get a chance. So it's one of them, and you've got to score goals to win football matches. Ed, absolute pleasure as always, my friend. And I know we're going to have a little chat now, so I'll just play this intro video. But of course, hopefully next time we speak on Sunday morning, I'll be gloating about 3 points for Cardiff. I'd be lying if I said I was confident, I got to say. No, thank you.
Cheers.